Earthdawn Shadows of Truth session summary number 4. We picked up from the evening in the Shindo Otoka Gully where the characters had just had a discussion with the ally spirit Haridon. They rested there overnight before they then in the morning, using their horses, moved the destruction of the wagon out of the way so that they could make their way across the bridge. Travelling northward towards the Serpent River still, several hours before, not too long, before evening camp, they were then accosted on the road, as shown by this map here, by several soldiers and some guardsmen. Now, this man, introducing himself as Captain Zavar of Iopus, stopped the party from trailing. They all had this symbol identifying themselves from the Silver Branch of Iopus. Captain Zavar then questioned the party on their knowledge of the wagon and of Sergeant Vega, who was the orc who was leading the big wagon. Just as the party stopped at this section on the road, as usual, Xanthia in the rear wagon slid out and attempted to hide, as she usually does, to try and flank in situations like this. Very quickly, she was actually discovered and then captured at that moment by, who is listed here as Zavar's left hand, human female who came out and has, she has more than this actually, but she has camouflage painted all over her face. As Zavar made his way through his troops, all very military disciplined, armed and equipped with the same type of equipment. They were all wearing black and green armour and bearing that symbol as shown on their armour. With Zavar was this human with black and green robes. Zavar then questioned a Sledge as to their knowledge of the wagon and Sergeant Vega, whom Zavar kept calling the stupid orc. As Sledge began to feel more and more pressure through the conversation, Wayland then stepped in. Zavar, having established that the party had travelled from Jerris and had come through Shindo Otoka, then and then Sledge having admitted that they knew of the wagon and that it had been ambushed, in so many words, Zavar then made the assumption that the party had looted the wagon and demanded everything be returned to him. When the weapons and the equipment were being returned, he also demanded the ledger, if they had one. There was a ledger on the wagon, and Alira had possession of the ledger. So when Alira handed that over, Zavar read through the ledger and then asked the party, demanded of the party, where was the orichalcum box that he was looking for. Made the assumption that they may have seen it or had not handed it over. At this point, Wayland stepped into the conversation and informed Zavar that the wagon, when they came across it, had already been ambushed and destroyed, with the guardsmen who were guarding it injured or killed, and then that Wayland and his group here were then ambushed by bandits at the same time, or when they came across the wreckage. They then went through the wreckage, found what they found. They described the Windling Archer, they described the human Beastmaster, and they said nothing of the Harmonious Shadows. Zavar then, being satisfied that they were telling the truth to a degree, took the ledger only, left them with everything else, before he proceeded to let them go under ominous threats. Wayland made a deal to be paid for him. Zavar comes across as a very intimidating and confident fighter. He's confident in his abilities, he's confident in the weight of the soldiers with him and with his perceived authority to achieve the mission that he is on. I forgot to mention that the party did actually rest the night before, so there was a night that occurred before this. This is now actually about 2 hours before they arrive in Halfhaven, the township on the River of the Serpent. So after Captain Zavar and his men leave, the party continue on to the Serpent River to get to Halfhaven. They arrive in the evening. I have to go over here to see the map. Yes, move me. And I'll move the map back a bit. Okay, so they arrive from the south down here, and there was a guard tower when they arrived. When they got to the guard tower, they were then spoken to by the local town guardsmen, and the guardsmen are known as the River Wardens. They were met by this man, Captain Reland Redcrest, who announced himself as the captain of the River Wardens. Sledge knows him. You've met him a couple of times. He had a conversation with Sledge and informed Sledge that there were some ill tidings in town around the disappearance of the first Guardian, Solus Duxal. Solus Duxal is a Scrang, who the first Guardian is their equivalent to Governor or Mayor, and Captain Redcrest has informed them that Duxal's been missing for almost a week, and because of that, there's been infighting in the factions between the freeholders and the dock workers. So the dock workers control very much the docks, the loading and unloading of the ships, and maintenance of the docks in that area. And the freeholders are mainly the merchants and traders and landholders. So there is a conflicting opinion, because in the absence of the first Guardian, there isn't an actual second in command to fall into place. There hasn't been a situation in the history of Halfhaven where they've needed anything like that. So the issue currently, as Redcrest explains it, is that the leader of the freeholders, Elindra, is demanding that they hold an emergency session to appoint a temporary guardian, which is provisioned in the laws but has never been acted before. And the main council representatives, who are generally advisors, not specifically a council, but they are mainly advisors to the first Guardian, is the captain of the River Wardens, that would be Redcrest, the head of the freeholders, that would be Elindra, and the head of the dock workers, that would be Jurla. Now, in the absence of the first Guardian, they can vote on a temporary Guardian. The dock workers are concerned at this point that the freeholders, if they were elected into this temporary position, would use that position in order to negotiate a trade agreement with either Ishkarat or Iopus, or both. So the dock workers have shut down the docks, demanding that that agreement doesn't go ahead. They are basically holding the freeholders to ransom currently. There is no movement, as far as Redcrest knows, between those two positions at the moment, and he's basically saying everyone's just hoping that Solus turns up at some point. The party at this point also met his offsider, Junior Warden Trina, who was also at the Gate Tower. They then made their way down to the main township of Halfhaven, and there's the main picture there of Halfhaven itself. So this is represented, the township here, the statue is represented by the town and the statue here. The river there bends around this rock face, which is represented in that curve there. So in town, because the river, because the dock workers have closed up the docks, they're not allowing anyone in or out of the area. They have put floating barrels across the actual docks themselves so that the ships can't berth at the docks. So there are actually a bunch of ships that are anchored in the harbour here that can't get to the docks, unload their goods. They can't pick up other goods. So there's a standoff at the moment. So the party then make their way, Sledge says that he needs to go and speak to his trading partner, a Scrane called Ovar, who is also one of the local traders in town and lives in Half Haven. Sledge takes Anthea and Prath with him and the wagons in order to unload his goods. Sledge is meant to be picking up new goods, but it would appear that those goods are still on a ship, so he is unable to do that at the moment. So Sledge goes off, and then the party go off to the tavern to rest, eat, drink. So as they get to the tavern and they take their seats, the tavern itself is in an old temple. The main structures around Half Haven are old temples and shrines to to the Passions, primarily to Garland. The inn itself, or the tavern itself, is called the Garland's Way, and it is run by an innkeeper called Projoris, and that's what Projoris looks like. Projoris, let's move this back over a bit. Projoris is a Winling, and he has lived in Half Haven for many years. He's actually taken the name Half Haven itself as his surname. Half Haven is the sort of last frontier town that isn't controlled by Ishkarat or Iopus, positioned where it is. So there's a lot of contention around its independence wanted by the locals, and obviously the township itself is quite valuable, positioned where it is, the structure of what it is, and is of interest to all of the parties from Ishkarat to Iopus to the Fire Scale Trollmoot, which are to the north. Projoris takes the party into the tavern, seats them down, and takes their orders. During that time between Projoris coming back with drinks and menus, the party notice that also seated in the tavern are 3 of the 4 members of the Harmonious Shadows. Those members being Kara, Astabus, and Selhara. So they are seated at a table having drinks, and seated with them, who is quickly identified as the local quester of Garland, Varden Rookspire. He's sitting with those 3 from the Harmonious Shadows. So the group have a discussion around what they should do, and Waylon and Vrikara decide that they are going to split off and head into the main part of the temples, which is just in the rather large open foyer to the Care itself. So the Care entrance was originally underneath the massive statue of Garland, which travels up the cliff face, and in that is a massive open foyer. Foyer doesn't really do the term justice, but inside this area is the shrine to Garland, the active shrine to Garland, and also many of the merchant stores, also some apartment style living for some of the wealthier class. The original doors to the Care are also in this area, but they are sealed and have been sealed since the time of the Scourge, so no one actually goes into the older part of the Care from this point. So Vrikara and Waylon decide that they want to... and they find out that the 4th member, who is Tharok Stonevoice, the leader of the Harmonious Shadows, has been injured, and he is in fact in the Shrine of Garland being treated by Varden Rookspire. So they decide to split. Vrikara and Waylon are going to go and attempt to speak to Tharok, and Illyra and Adolf are going to suss out the other members of the Harmonious Shadows and see what they can find, and talk to Projoris, getting some more information on the politics in town. So the party's split in half, and the Vrikara and Waylon head on towards the marketplace, and they find that the doors for that area are closed at this time, and there are 2 guards there. Waylon has words with one of the guards, who is Warden Erickson Barish, this young man here, and as Eriksson won't allow them into that area at night, regardless of Wayland's protests. Wayland then informs Eriksson that he's going to go all Karen on his ass and go and complain to Captain Redcrest. So during that time, Alira and Adarth approach the members of the Harmonious Shadows and Varden, and they have a conversation with them. They are trying to extract information from the Shadows about what they're doing here, where they're going, that sort of thing. The Shadows inform them that they've got some shows to attend, or they've got one main show that is up the Serpent River on a massive riverboat, part of the regular type of travelling shows that occur. They are concerned, of course, that Tharok, being injured, may not be able to perform, so they're hoping that, being here, he'll be able to heal up quickly so he can perform. Adarth discusses with them his interest in music, being troubadours. They have a lot in common, and Adarth doing a musical performance, which was actually playing a version of Selhara's song, and doing it very well, makes a good impression on the Shadows, and the group then continue to discuss music and performance, with the possibility of performing together the following night, although the Shadows are somewhat hesitant to do that, but they were reasonably impressed by Adarth's performance, so they're going to see how that goes tomorrow with some possible solo performances. During that time, Vrakara and Wayland do head back up to the tower and speak to Captain Redcrest. They have a short conversation where Wayland does convince Redcrest that he needs to speak to Tharok, and he needs to speak to him urgently, and can he be escorted, or can he and Vrakara be escorted to go and see him. Redcrest does mention several times that Varden can escort them to the temple, considering Varden is the one that manages it, though Wayland insists that he'd rather fewer people know as possible. So Redcrest agrees to take them to see Tharok. Redcrest then escorts them back down to the gates, and that is where we ended up the session for session 4, and we will continue on from that point